Hello. We have Ralph Kinder here today, so I'm very excited to chat with you.
Lindsay, I'm
Um,
excited.
yeah, no, thanks for coming. So, yeah, you're an expert franchise consultant with, many years of experience helping entrepreneurs navigate the world of franchise ownership. So, today I'm just going to ask you a few questions about your world in franchising, which might be helpful for anyone who is interested in learning more about the whole franchising world and the process from a consultant's perspective. So, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh no, I'm excited. Look, this is so much fun for me. I guess I could joke and say that for everybody I've helped, I've got a gray hair. I don't really know, but yeah, I've helped a whole lot of people over the years. Um, but it's a lot of fun. So I'm kind of excited to kind of chat with you and just see what's going on and and see if we can kind of help some folks kind of figure out this whole crazy industry and make some sense of it and figure out whether it's right for them or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good. That's good. Yeah, I know I kind of came across this by accident too. Franchising, I didn't really know, so it was always good to learn from someone that had a lot of experience and knowledge in it. So, with that being said, how about, you just start by telling me a little bit about your background and what inspired you to become a, you know, franchise consultant?
Yeah, no, great. I love that. My story is really interesting because, I spent a lot of time in corporate America. I grew up in Texas. I still live in Texas, and, business major and all that. And so I was always really highly attuned to, business and franchising and, operations and processes. And in my corporate career, I was always kind of the fix it guy, right? If there's, a territory or a location or a region or whatever that needed work, I was always the guy that kind of got sent in. And even with that, I started my career in restaurants, in hospitality, and then probably about 10 or 12 years into my career, I was director of operations for sort of a small startup company that wanted to start franchising. And at that point, I didn't have any franchise experience, although I was familiar with it, surely
Yeah.
from just life in general, and then from business school and what have you. And then they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Well, we want you to kind of lead franchise development." And I was like, "Oh crap!" Like, that's
What's that?
where do I start?
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting path for me to take because, you know, clearly I understood all the business metrics and what you're trying to get for return on investments and how to get a business up and launched and scaled and run and profitable and all that stuff. But what I didn't really understand was the whole franchise development piece, which is a different sort of nuance, if you will. And so with franchise development, you're really taking people that don't have a background probably in franchising. You're
Mhm.
educating them about what franchising is, the Federal Trade Commission that rules, that oversees franchising, franchise development documents and things of that nature. And so, it was an interesting learning curve for me to have to learn really how to approach franchise development. And so I did. And then one of the ways, interestingly, that we had a couple of specific subsets of people that we wanted to approach and target for potential franchisees. Because we were a restaurant group, we wanted to target existing restaurant franchisees that really understood business, they understood franchising. We felt like we were a really good diversification strategy for them, and we had success doing that. The other group that we really wanted to approach were the sophisticated investors, people that wanted to find a business that they could own, not operate themselves, call that a manager run model, but they would hire a manager to run the day-to-day business for them. And most of those people we found through consultant networks, which I had
Mm.
not had any familiarity with before I did this role. And so that was really my first exposure, not only to franchising in terms of my professional career, but also to the franchise consulting niche in which I do today. So, fast forward through, a long career, I was always starting my own side hustles and,
Mhm.
my own businesses, some that worked well, some that didn't. I would always say, choose your partners carefully on one of them. But yeah, I've just always been passionate about it. And so, as I went through my career, I was, really fortunate to do some cool things. I've run a $150 million P&L, with
Wow.
about 100 franchisees that I worked with as a more of a franchise coach, if you will, where I'm helping them, better their business. I've led franchise development across the U.S. I've led U.S. operations and construction for a hospitality group across the U.S. But then there comes a time where you're like, there's got to be more, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing left for me to prove. And so through some long conversations with my wife and through some friends of mine, I stayed in touch with the group that I'm with today, which is FranChoice. And so, I thought, why can't I just take, my skills, my knowledge, and utilize those to start helping people? And so that's where I'm at today. So here I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now. I love what I
Wow.
do. I get to help people. And it's a great feeling because sometimes I help people realize their next dream, and sometimes I help people quite honestly realize that maybe it's not the right time for them, and either
Right.
way it's okay.
Either way, yeah, you're helping someone.
Yeah.
So now, when you are working with clients, what is your whole process for understanding what their goals are, their skills, and like their financial needs before you go ahead recommending any franchise options to them?
Oh yeah, that is critical path.
Oh yeah.
I talk about not really about the hottest brand, right? And sometimes
Mhm.
people approach me and they're like, what's the hottest brand out there? And I'm like, well, does it really matter what the hottest brand is? Whatever someone does in franchising, it has to fit their lifestyle goals, their
Yep.
investment goals, their long-term goals. What's their exit strategy? What sort of life do they want to lead? Are they comfortable, networking within the community, or do they want to stay away from that? Are they trying to replace an income quickly, or are they trying to create a secondary income stream while they stay in corporate America? Are you
Yep.
trying to find something where you can start it, build it while you still remain employed with your current employer, and then use that once you're able to replace your income to successfully exit corporate America? Are we building for wealth and legacy? Are you looking to have your kids come in and join the business and eventually pass it on to them? There's so much to it that what's really important is helping people really sort of identify what's most important to them in any
Yep.
business and how do you want to live your life, right?
Yeah.
I kind of talk it about, it's sort of like a cafeteria. There's 4,000 brands that are out there,
Hmm.
right? And for you to go through and just start looking at the hottest brand or, read something on the internet, because everything's true on the internet, of course. But,
Right. I know.
you read something on the internet
Mm.
and then, you're like a squirrel floating, oh, look, I see another squirrel, another squirrel, another squirrel. But if they're not
Yeah.
aligned with what you're trying to do, there's really not a lot of sense in really honestly talking to any brands until you know what you're trying to solve for. I even wrote a book about it, which
Oh
I'm not pitching to
wow.
sell, but it's Franchising Done Right, a step-by-step guide to choosing the
Good
perfect
to
franchise.
know.
And I
We're
teach
always
people,
looking for more business books, so I appreciate you sharing that.
yeah, and so that's what I do is I teach people how to do this on their own. And look, I'd love to work with them. I love helping people, but sometimes it's not the right time, or sometimes they just want to, do some investigation. So, that book and websites and stuff like that is a great way to, to go back and do some research, before you even start. But number one thing, you've got to identify what you're trying to solve for.
Mhm. Yeah, no, no, and honestly, thank you for sharing the book because I know that, I know I'm always looking for more business books, like, and it's always good to like think of something to just pass it because reading is important. Reading, gives you knowledge and gives you power. So that is great. Now, how do you like evaluate and vet franchises before you go ahead recommending them to a client?
Yeah,
I guess
that's
like
a
yeah, like what criteria is most important to you?
yeah, really good question, Lindsay. So there's a lot of tools that I use
Excuse
in
me.
my business with doing just exactly that evaluation. So
Mhm.
there's a third party software system that I use, and it's essentially a self assessment. It's called Zoracle.
Mhm.
And what they will do is candidates that I work with will fill out an online questionnaire. It doesn't cost them anything, and then it will come back with their leadership style, what sort of cultures that that are aligned with them, what their risk profile is, what
Yeah.
large organizational cultures that they most closely identify with, and even the life cycle of a company. Because within franchising or any company that's out there, you've got the startup phase, you've got the growing phase, you've got the sort of the empire phase, you know, you've got other phases scattered throughout. So some people have a higher risk tolerance and are comfortable looking at emerging brands. Some people want to stay the hell away from emerging brands because of the risk profile. There's no wrong answer to it. You just have to know that. So Zoracle is one of the things that I use. The other thing that I use to do sort of a third party evaluation on brands is I look for third party validation of existing brands. One of those tools that I use is a company called Franchise Business Review. Franchise Business Review is a third party. It's led by a gentleman by the name of Eric Stites. I've known of Eric. I've never met him, but I've known of Eric for 20 plus years. And what they do is they send out again, there's 4,000 brands out there. But what they do is they send out to franchisees questionnaires asking them specific questions about the business. And then they'll get thousands of responses back. They only send them to brands that have at least 10 franchisees. So they'll collate all the responses, they'll benchmark all the responses, and then they'll have a top 200 ranking based around franchisee satisfaction, best franchises for veterans, best low-cost franchises, most recession-resistant franchises, and so forth and so on. So that's clearly not the only thing I do, but I pay attention to that because franchisee validation is the most critical thing when I look at franchises. And so, as a part of my organization, we meet with our franchise companies, twice a year in January and in July. We're coming up on another one in a couple of weeks. And we sit down with those franchise brands and we ask them very specific questions. We ask them about their ownership structure. And what I mean by ownership structure is, are their franchisees meant to be owner operator? Do they have manager run franchises? What is the franchisee's role? Are they out there in the community, really engaging with other business leaders? Are they expected to be working with their clients on a daily basis? What's the role for them? What is the validation for franchises? What I mean by that, Lindsay, is validation. What do your existing franchisees say about you?
Right.
I mean, no company's perfect. No human is perfect. We all screw stuff up all the time. But how does the company respond when there's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
And so the brands that have the best franchisee validation, existing franchisees that ultimately say, yep, it was a great decision. Yes, I'm glad I did it. Yes, I would do it again. That is a huge tick in the box for me. The other pieces are obvious, the obvious things. What's the investment? What are the fees that you're going to charge? All franchisors have this franchise disclosure document you have to have. So they have to have, it's all public, right? So, so what are the fees that franchisees are charged? What's the investment? Do they have an item 19, which is the financial performance representation? What does that say? How long have they been around, right? There's always, with more established brands and with more franchisees, you get more people you can talk to. So generally speaking, there's less risk, right? If you've got fewer franchisees to talk to and they haven't been around as long, it just goes, it's sort of common sense. It's a little bit higher risk of an opportunity. So there's a lot that goes behind the scenes on making sure that, when I recommend brands to someone, that I feel good that A, the brand is a good brand, and B, that it's aligned with what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So with all that being said, do you have an example of a challenging client placement? Someone you've taken through the process, shown some franchises. So someone that was, maybe a little bit more challenging, and then how did you work through it to find a good franchise fit in the end?
Yeah. So I worked with a gentleman a few years ago, and he was in the oil field industry, and he was in Williston, North Dakota. And Williston, North Dakota is a town of 27,000 people, and very sharp guy, young family, extraordinary business mind. He was an operations manager, led a large team, but he was in the oil fields, and he was in Williston, North Dakota. And there's not a lot in Williston, North Dakota. And, so when I first spoke with him, I said, well, John, before I even move forward, let me do some research on some brands that would be an appropriate market for, because and franchisors don't want to put somebody in a position to fail either. Right.
Right.
But at 27,000 people, and the metro area might've been 30,000 people, that's really not enough to sustain most franchise brands. And so, so I started talking to some brands that I knew and I knew well, and sort of explained what he was looking to try and accomplish. He wanted to stay in his role, and then launch, his side hustle, create a secondary income stream. And so it took some time, but I was able to find about 3 brands that had solutions for him. Interestingly enough, not in Williston.
Oh.
And so, he was looking for something more in the home services segments, if you will.
Mhm.
And so I found a brand for him. He ended up moving forward with it. He opened his brand as a manager run. So he hired a manager to run it for him on a day-to-day basis in Fargo, North Dakota, which was 4 to 4.5 hours away from him. I think maybe even farther,
Oh, wow.
but it worked. And,
Mhm.
I had some, I had some sweaty palms on that one because, again, the last thing I want to do is set somebody up to fail. And he crushed it. And
Good.
first year in, he was named rookie of the year. He did well enough. He was able to quit his job, moved his whole family to Fargo, and off he went. And so, but it was a challenge because of where his location was. One of the things I like about, you know, some other brands, some B2B brands, right? Business
Yep.
coaching and cost consulting and stuff like that, is it's really remote. You can really work from anywhere and have your client base anywhere. That could have also been a solution for him, if it would have been, what he was looking for. But yeah,
Right.
that was an interesting one. That was a little tricky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sounds like you figured it out anyway in the end, so that's great.
Yep.
Now how about, like how do you tailor your approach for clients with varying financial situations or business backgrounds?
Yeah. I just listen. I don't
Yeah.
mean to be, evasive on that, and I'm not, but I just listen to what they're trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
I have worked with people with $30 million net worths. They're comfortable risking, 100,000. I've
Yeah.
worked with people that have, you know, a net worth of, $300,000, and they're comfortable risking everything that they have in cash.
Yeah.
I am very mindful of what people have, and one of my things is I'm for them. I'm protective,
Yep.
of their investment and their money. So I don't want ever anyone to go all in. And there are times where if someone just doesn't have, the financial liquidity to be able to do it, or it's not aligned with what they're trying to accomplish long term, in terms of, they want to invest $50,000 and, make $500,000 within 1 year. That's not realistic. At that point, it's
Yeah.
better to just say, let's pause this, come back when you've got, a little bit more gas in the tank and when the timing is a little bit
Yeah.
better. But yeah, but other than that, you have to really be attuned to what their comfort level is in terms of
Yep.
risk, what their expected return on investments are, what they're looking to gain in terms of profit and income and things of that nature, and really tailor your approach to what they're seeking.
Yeah. Saying to someone, like, let's pause it because, like liquid wise, you're not quite there, that could be kind of maybe a difficult conversation to have. You never know, I guess, how that might go. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, just like you said, listening, being upfront, honest, real, having those conversations, you can get through it. So that's good. Sounds like a very, good process anyway.
Yeah.
Now, how about a story, not a long story, but a story of a particular client
It's too late
that
for me. I'm always long stories.
oh, there we go. Well, whatever. I'll get some popcorn. But yeah, a story of a particular client that ended up choosing the right business. They found the success that they've always wanted. Like how does that make you feel, when you're able to help someone fulfill that dream of getting into business for themselves?
It is the best feeling in the world. It's why I do this.
Yeah.
I'll tell it quickly, but I had a candidate in Chicago, and she had a
Yeah.
very high pressure job. She was in product management for a major corporation, and the pressure was just intense. She's working 70, 80 hours a week. She had a young family. Her husband also worked a lot, and she just was desperate to find something. And
Hmm.
so, through working with her, it took her some time to make her decision. But she chose a business that worked for her. It was a business to business, franchise opportunity. And within 6 months, she had left her job. Life had gotten to
Wow.
normal, and then she was doing what she wanted to do. And I mean, I kind of get giddy with stuff like that because
Yeah, of
it's such a cool
course.
story seeing someone who's so miserable, and just
Mhm.
really doesn't know where to turn. And then, you know, put a little bit of faith into the system and take a calculated risk and then make the leap and have it turn out. I mean, it's what America's about.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I can imagine that feel like that's gotta feel good, knowing that you really helped someone change their life, really.
Yeah, best feeling
Um,
in the world.
yeah. Now, what about some of the most common misconceptions that clients have about franchising? How do you address that?
Yeah, I think the first one is everybody thinks it's food. It's
Yep.
restaurants, I mean, look, it's normal, right? We drive by McDonald's and Burger King and Chick-fil-A and yada 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 all day
Yep.
long, and then, with restaurants, they think, well, everybody's got to eat, or I really like the burger or the donut or the whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but from personal experience, I know that's really, really difficult business. But franchising is so much more broad than just that. There's, as I mentioned already, there's B2B coaching, there's, businesses sitting around kids enrichment and activities and education, you know, home health care and home services and, boring old businesses that nobody's ever
Mhm.
thought of and stuff like that, and fitness and health and wellness and med spas and whatever. And it's just really, really a huge, broad industry that's out there. Um, and it's really designed to make people successful. And that's one of the
Yep.
probably the other misconception that I think that, sometimes when I first start working with people that they'll have sometimes is they think that franchising is really geared towards making the franchisor oodles and oodles of money on the
Right.
backs of the franchisees. And that's really not what makes successful franchises work. What makes successful franchisors, and the best ones have figured this out, what makes successful franchisors work is they know that the only way they're going to grow their brand is to have successful franchisees. And
Mhm.
so that means they've got to have top level support on the operational side, on the marketing side, on, if there's a development component to it, meaning real estate, they've got to have top
Yep.
level support on that. They've got to have a quick launch program for franchisees in today's market. Usually there's some fear and anxiety around employees. So many of them have, a lot of assistance with recruiting, but more than anything, the business model has to work, right? And they
Mhm.
have to really understand who their core customer is, how to do customer acquisition and customer retention. And they do their best to drive business to the franchisees. And when they do that, and they're going to stub their toe, but when they do that,
Mhm.
then franchisees are successful. And then when franchisees are successful, when the next guy calls on the phone and says, "Hey Ralph, how's this one? Oh man, they pissed me off the other day, but it's great because I'm doing XYZ," right?
Yeah.
Having a profitable business will forgive a whole lot of sins. But that's what really drives franchising. The good brands that have really good systems and processes that really
Yeah.
support their franchisees, that have the right culture, that's what makes brands successful. Now, when franchisees make more money, franchisors make more money too, but that's okay. They created the system and the package and, and the setup and created the vendor relationships and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it is truly a win-win when it's done right.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense. Absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, I very much appreciate you joining me today and sharing your insights. It was really, nice to know, how you do things, in your process and, what you do and how you do it kind of thing. So this was all very valuable information. I'm sure anyone who is interested in learning more about franchising will, and business ownership, will take, what you've said and, go from there. So, and maybe they'll even know what it's like to be a franchise consultant too. So,
There
no,
you
I
go.
really, yeah, I really appreciate your time today, Ralph. So thank you so much for that.
Lindsay, you're the best. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Right. All right. I am here today with Ralph Kinder from Franchoice. Thank you for sitting with me today.
Happy to be here, my
Um,
friend.
good, good. Yeah. As you know, I've got one burning question here for you. What is your experience or has your experience been like working with Schoolie Mitchell? And what is it about Schoolie Mitchell that makes it attractive to some of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all kidding aside. I love what you guys do. We call it frick and frack,
Mhm.
but the communication from you guys, Lindsay, is just it's phenomenal. I mean, really, honestly, I think probably out of all the brands that we work with in our portfolio, top 5, maybe the top 1. I mean, you guys are
Oh,
just great
oh
about
goodness.
communication, and you send out a lot of things that have value for me in my role, right?
Mhm.
Some things that I can use on LinkedIn or repost and things of that nature, or sometimes just things to make me think about my own business. Um, and there's value to that, right? Because I think for me, you guys really understand that this whole franchising thing is really, it's a symbiotic partnership, right?
Mhm.
You guys want us as consultants to do well and to have, some more arrows in the quiver, if you will, right,
Of
with some of the
course. Yeah.
materials that you send out, because you know that as we do well, then we're going to be laser focused on finding not just more candidates for you, but the right ones for you.
Yep.
And I love that. I love what you guys do. I love the business model. I mean, you know, I'm a huge fan because my background's restaurants, and that's such a huge expense, and
Oh yeah.
massive capital that's required to operate those things, and the hours and the slim margins and all that stuff. But just what you guys do and the business model of it, I think it's phenomenal. Right? And so if when I find, and I want to find more candidates, to be honest with you, but when I find people where they get that really good, deep business background. They want to go out there and they want to help people, and they
Yep.
see the value in what you guys do. Um, I mean, it's just a win. I mean, the value that you bring organizations. When I ran restaurants way back in the day, we utilized a company like yours. We didn't do Schoolie Mitchell, but we utilized a company like yours, and we
Yeah.
were a small company, and we got a big, huge, fat check. And it
Mhm.
was glorious because it was money that we didn't know was there that this company found for us. And so the fact that you guys do that not only with your clients, but then your franchisees have the support of your home office. I mean, you're rock stars.
Yeah.
The more people I can put in front of you guys, the happier I'll be, just because I know they'll be taken care of, and it's a great brand with what you do. It's just the icing on the cake.
Oh, good. That is really good to hear because I know that we do take a lot of pride in our process, and we are very serious about it, just like I'm sure a lot of other people are about their own process, but making sure that we are, on top of it. And we try to get back to people within the hour of like even a territory check, especially, like a formal registration. So, yeah, communication is big for us, and I'm happy that shows. So thank you so much for mentioning that, and taking time to, just share that with me today.
Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, man. You guys are killing it. I will actively seek more people to bring to Schoolie Mitchell, just because I know they'll be taken care of. Whether they choose to pursue a career in franchising or not,
Yeah,
I know they'll be better off when I get them back from you guys. So,
great. Yep. Nope. You betcha. All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks again, Ralph, and we'll chat with you again soon.
all right, appreciate it, Lindsay.